The Q8 e-tron. It's the big daddy of Audi's EVs and it's very premium. Everything down to the charge point and the way that opens is slick about this car. Now really recently we drove the Q4 e-tron and we thought that was an excellent car. It's built off the same chassis as the ID4 and it's just a really good EV. However, when you take it a step up to the Q8, things become even more premium and the prices actually become a little bit more too. So this is about 30,000 euros more than a Q4 e-tron, but you are getting a lot, everything down to air suspension and a really nice cabin on the inside. So prices for this start at about 86,000 euros, and obviously depending on which version you go for, which we'll be educating you on in this review, they can go up into the hundreds. Now this is the Done Deal YouTube channel. If you'd like to search for Audis for sale in Ireland, you can hit the link up there. Now let's get into the review. So this replaces that original e-tron that you might remember. If you can't, there's a link up there to our review of it. But it was kind of one of the first electric SUVs to hit the market. And it was really good, but now it's just a bit more spruced up with the Matrix headlights and a few other things. And also when it comes to powertrain, it's a little bit more efficient. It's also got now a 106 kilowatt hour battery. That is a big old battery, and it's capable, depending on which version, of up to 573 kilometers. As we make our way around the side, it is quite similar to that original e-tron. This one's got some really nice alloy wheels. There's some nice aero coming through the front, and then again at the rear, I love the light bar along the side. And whilst it is the new version of the old e-tron, this one's obviously badged with the Q8, meaning it's going to be probably their biggest electric car that they'll take to the market. So what is powering the Q8 e-tron? This is kind of where things always get complicated with Audis, because there's random numbers thrown in there which don't necessarily make sense. However, we're going to dumb it down and make it nice and easy. So to begin with, there's 3 trim levels when you go to buy it. There's Advanced, Sport, and then S-Line. This is the S-Line, and it does just, there's something about Audis and S-Lines that work really well. Then in terms of powertrains, so there is basically a 50 and a 55 Quattro. Now that is to do with the size of the electric motor. So the 50 has a 250 kilowatt motor, which produces 325 brake horsepower, and the 55 has a 300 kilowatt motor, which produces about 400 horsepower. So it's pretty quick. This is the 55 Quattro. There is also an SQ8 e-tron, which that thing has over 500 brake horsepower. It's absolutely bonkers. But I think, to be honest, the 55 Quattro is probably the one to go for. Couple things that I think are cool and uncool about the Q8 e-tron. To begin with, the uncool stuff. And I just think this Audi Q8 e-tron Quattro that sits on the side here, it almost looks a little bit like a courtesy car. And the second thing is, whilst this is the Q8 e-tron, it's not actually as big in the flesh or as wide to drive as you might expect a Q8 to be, particularly when you think of how big a Q7 was in the past. And what's more is, to get the 55 Quattro S-Line, which personally I think is the one to go for, you need about 106k, and that's ever so slightly less than a standard e-tron GT. And personally, I choose the e-tron GT. That said, there are some really cool things on the Q8 e-tron, and the first of which is that there's 2 charge points on both sides, which just makes it easier using public chargers. But what's more is, on this side, you've actually got some fast charging. So it's up to 170 kilowatts, which is really quick. And let us not forget just how slick that actually is. The second thing that's quite cool is if you hit this button down here and then go to Park Assist, the car will park itself. So we're going to try it right now, and we're actually going to see, can we get it in to an EV charge point. So it's saying, please stop the vehicle. But I've missed that spot, so we're going to try one more forwards. Put it in reverse. So now I'm going to go handless. It's always the most frightening experience of your whole life. Look at that steering wheel. Ugh. You could do this quickly, but you'd be stone mad. Didn't go into the EV spot, but anyway. Now it wants me to go forward. Oh, it did go into the EV spot. Oh, wow. Do you know what? If you did this with absolute confidence, it would be pretty good. And just like that, we can charge her up. And as you can see, it's parked like a true Audi driver. Boot space. I suppose this is one area where maybe this might be a little bit more enticing than an e-tron GT. So in here, it really depends on which version you go for. So this is available as a normal Q8 e-tron and also as a sportback. Now, if you go for the normal one, it's 569 litres, which is absolutely massive, and it does decrease to 528 in the sportback. There's also actually a 62 litre front boot, which is great for charging cables or takeaways because it doesn't stink up. And actually here, there's a good bit of storage under there for chargers, some netting, and then there is of course a parcel shelf so that you can hide things down. And folding the rear seats is really easy. You just pull this button here and they go down, and they actually split in 3 different ways, which is very, very handy. In the rear, doors open nice and wide, and one thing I love is the ISOFIX points really easily accessible, and there's actually a third one in the front. So if you're fond of having babies, you'll be fond of the Q8 e-tron. Really good knee room, really decent headroom, so it's actually just a lovely place to sit back here. There's an armrest here and cup holders, just kind of cool how that opens. And then one thing I want to draw your attention to is this little screen here. So you've got your own independent climate control back here. It's really easily adjustable, something for the kids to play with, and it is just a nice little touch. And then there's a 12-volt socket and 2 USB-C charge points. In the cockpit here, lovely place to sit, as you can imagine. And we're actually gone back to having essentially 4 screens. So we have our climate control down here, then our main infotainment system, and then we have a driver's display here, which is brilliant. And then last but not least, the 4th screen is on the windscreen. It's the heads-up display, which has your speed, your cruise control, and a few other little minor details. Now, we went away from this, so we saw this in the old e-tron and also in things like the Audi A6, but then when the e-tron GT came out, we went back to physical buttons. I really liked it, a lot of people did, but now we've obviously gone back to it, so there must have been some sort of demand. I think the coolest part about it actually, other than being able to quickly change your climate control, is that you can draw on it. So if I go into the navigation inbuilt here and I want to search for a location, what it does is it allows me to come down here and actually draw a letter, and it works really, really well. So if I key in D, and then it goes
D,
O,
O,
N, done deal. Subscribe. But it's a really good system as a whole, and obviously Apple CarPlay connects up so quickly, so I've just used Waze the whole time, but that navigation will prepare the battery if you're on a long drive to make sure you can optimize to charge quickly. And everything else is lovely. Memory seats, so if you're sharing this car with your partner, you can both have it set up. Not so sure how I feel about this kind of material here, but I'm sure that can be spec'd in different ways. There is a little bit of storage down here. The gear shifter is quite cool, actually. You just pull it back to put it into gear and push it forward to put it into reverse. And just as a whole, it's an Audi in here in a lovely way, and yeah, can't complain about that. So to drive, as you can imagine, it's excellent. I think the standout thing is the air suspension. So it's completely adjustable here. You can raise and lower the ride height depending on your driving. But what that also does is it just makes it a little bit softer and the dampening's a little bit better. Now that said, it's nowhere near as good as the air suspension that you'd see in something like a Range Rover or a Range Rover Sport. That's in a whole class of its own. But here in the Q8 e-tron, it is very smooth. And if you go into your different driving modes, you can put it in off-road mode. I haven't tried it, but I can imagine combined with the Quattro, the 4-wheel drive system, it should work quite well. And that leads me into the Quattro system. So they all come as a 4-wheel drive system, and it's quite good. I haven't found any of the wheels losing any grip whatsoever. Even when I've put it into dynamic mode and used all 400 horsepower, It definitely doesn't feel around 400 because modern cars, particularly EVs, are quite heavy and the power is quite linear. So I'd say more realistically, if you've been driving a car from, let's say, 2015 or 16, this feels more around the 250 mark, but it's plenty of power, more than enough. And then when you're on the motorway like this, you just click in your adaptive cruise control, and then it does have lane assist, so you'll see now it'll correct me just there as I went to veer off lane, which is just a nice little addition. Now, one thing we did talk about quite extensively in our Q4 review is what it's like to drive an EV versus an ordinary petrol or diesel engine. So I'd advise watching that because a lot of that will portray over into this video. But I suppose one big thing I want to talk about is the regenerative braking. So this kind of has an intelligent regenerative braking system where it'll read how much it needs to give you. Now, it's not quite one pedal driving, so now as I come to a halt, I do have to use the brake, which in my opinion is a bit of a disappointment. Now, Audi say it's more efficient this way. However, whether it's more efficient or not, I just quite like driving around only really using the accelerator. That said, you should be able to do about 90% of your driving without touching the brakes, which is amazing, and they can be adjusted, the regen, on these paddles here. But as a whole, it's a lovely car to drive, and it really does tick all the boxes. And whilst it's the Q8, it's not overly big that you're worried driving in kind of tight spots. So, big fan overall. So what is my overall consensus of the Q8 e-tron? Well, to begin with, it's certainly not as big as I expected. However, that's kind of a good thing because it's a lot more manageable around a city in the real world. On top of that, it is actually as luxurious and as premium as you would expect. It's a gorgeous place to sit. Right now I've got the heated seat on, and it is quite literally frying my backside in a good way. And so it's a great place to use all 106 kilowatt hours of that battery and get some mileage under your belt. You'll be very, very comfortable. You'll be entertained. The sound system's good. Your maps comes up. It's just a great place to sit. I think the biggest competitor, if you don't need all that extra boot space, is probably the e-tron GT, because that car, for a well-spec'd one of these, it's very similar money. And I just think the e-tron GT, best EV nearly out there at the moment. Now this is really good, but obviously it's an SUV. Anyway, my biggest advice is go down to your local dealer. If you'd like to search where that is, you can hit the link up there and ask to go for a test drive and let them educate you on what's the best for you. But for now, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.